Now you should be able to hear me. Is that better? Hey, we've got that sound, we've got audio. Oh dear. There you go. Little problems when you go live sometimes. Up until now, it's been fine, as you can imagine. It really has. Now then, I was saying basically to myself, by the sounds of it, is that what you need to think about is not just the brushes that you're going to be using, but also, let's get rid of that now, but also the thickness of the paints, the consistency of that paint, and the type of paper you're using as well. That makes a big difference when you're working with fine lines. So if I just go to, one sec, trying to organise myself after being a little bit confused.com there. I'll start with my size 00, and this is what I use for all of my paintings, which I do. I've been using this type of brush for years, not this particular brush obviously, because they do wear out fairly swiftly. And this is one by Rosemary & Co. It's a Winsor & Newton, size 00, and it's the Series 311. Okay, so I'll show you what I mean. The first thing we'll do is overload that brush. That's not sticking down, is it? So we're going to get some paint first of all. I'm going to overload it, and we're going to tap any paint off or anything like that. I'm going to try and get a fine line with that. I know, would you think I'm going to get a fine line with it? Not really, I know. So bear with. Bear with. Why won't you stick down? One of them days today for me, isn't it? So to get a fine line, you can see even with this fine size 00 brush, it's not fine. That's because I've overloaded that brush. So if you're trying to do, say, cat's whiskers or anything like that, trying to get that lovely curve of a cat's whisker, or dogs, anything like that, or fine hairs as well, really fine hairs, you're not going to do that with, well, a fully loaded brush. So how do we kind of go around that? Well, what we need to do first of all is how to load that brush. I'm going to wash that out in some water. By the way, I've got dirty water one side, clean water on the other, just to give us some ideas how I tend to work. So wash out in the dirty water first of all, give it a dry in some kitchen roll, then do the same in the clean water. At least then I've got a nice clean brush to carry on with. Just going to get some tape a minute and take that paper down. Right, you will stay down whether you like it or not. There we go, a little bit of transparent tape there. So, loading the brush, how do we go about that? If I'm using my size 00 for example, I'm going to load it like that. I'm going to roll it as a pull away from the side of the mixing well, and that creates a point on that brush. Then I'm going to tap it probably once, maybe twice on some kitchen roll, and then using the lightest of touches, which is what I did there, believe it or not, I'll create some very fine lines, but it depends obviously on how pointed that brush is as well. I can see the difference by loading it correctly and how fine that line can get. Yes, I know this is a size 00, but to prove the point, what I'm going to show you in a minute is how to get a fine line by using a wider or thicker brush, a bigger size brush. So something like a size 6. Should we try that one? Yeah, I've got one here. Right, this one is by Rosemary & Co. I'm not sponsored by them or anything like that, but it's one I tend to use quite a lot now. This and the other sizes within their range as well, or some of the other sizes. Size 4, well that's a size 4, hang on. Size 6, da-da-da, happy accidents. And this is the XP Series 366. It's one of them days today, isn't it? I know. But it's because it's hot outside, it really is. About 26 degrees here today. So I'm going to load it. I'm going to roll it as I pull away. I'm going to get some kitchen roll, got some cleanish stuff there. Look. Got a bit of powder, like a wedge of kitchen roll there. I don't know, 2, 3, 4 times, anything like that will do. And then, using the natural curve of your wrist like that, bearing in mind I'm a left-handed person, so you're going to do it the other way around if you're right-handed, and you're going to create very fine lines with the tip of this brush. And when you compare that to something like the size 00, to be honest with you, this is slightly finer, but my old size 00 is quite worn anyway. But even so, using a size 6 brush, you can actually create some very fine lines, depending on the quality of that tip. And obviously, it does depend to a certain degree on the quality of that brush. So, here we go again. So, very fine lines. And the beauty about working with a larger brush with a decent tip like this one is that the paint, or the reservoir of paint within those bristles, will last a little bit longer, a bit wider there. Because I'm just messing about, I know. rather than having to keep reloading a size 00, even though I know I always use a size 00 for my wildlife paintings. The ones I do on Patreon, you know the ones. I'm not going to try and advertise myself too much. And you can create some very fine lines if you're working on, as I said, cat's whiskers, fine hairs. It's on a dog, a cat, I know, a mouse, you name it. You can create some very fine hairs using the tip of this quite large brush for me. For a lot of watercolour artists, this is quite small, I know. Let me know in the comments down below what size brush you prefer to use, especially if you like painting wildlife in watercolour as well. I'd like to know that, you know, and also what type of brush it is, what make is it. Yeah, that'd be quite interesting to find out. So that's how fine you can get with a size 6. But what about if there's not enough paint on that brush? What happens then? I'm going to take most of the paint off this very large brush. We'll try the smaller one as well. What will happen if there's hardly any paint on that brush? So you've not loaded it just enough yet. There you go. Still got a nice point on there, look. So there's just about enough paint on there at the moment, but if you haven't got enough paint on there, you find the line will break. Staying together, but the less paint you get on there, the more the line will break. And that's nowhere near as neat as this line here. This is a brand new brush, by the way. But when you've got a barely loaded brush like this one, look how fine those lines can be. I know this is slightly blurry for you today on this camera for some odd reason, but you've got the general idea on how fine those lines can get, even with, for me, a large brush. Size 6. Yeah. Really, really good. What if I just rinse that one out in my dirty and clean water a minute? I go to my size 00. My old one, the one I've been using for a long time now. I've done probably maybe 2-3 paintings with this, and usually after that very often they get a little bit kind of blunt on the end. But they're not expensive. They're not expensive. I don't like paying a lot of money for brushes. I don't know about you. This one, I've just loaded that again. So that's correctly loaded, as you can see. But if I take most of that paint off, just very carefully, don't just scrub it, otherwise you'll damage those bristles. And you can create still some very fine lines like that. Look at this compared to the size 6. Excuse me a minute. And you can see, you can create some very fine lines, but it's starting to break up on that paper and starting to get little gaps in between my line here. And that's because there's not quite enough paint on that brush. But it also depends as well on the technique you're trying to get. So if you want to paint some extremely tight areas within the fur of a dog or cat or anything like that, you can create those fine lines. If you want that sort of broken up effect on those lines when you really zoom into the photograph, or in this case into your painting, to get more of a broken edge, this is ideal for that. That's, well, dry brush, as you can see. And dry brush just picks up the texture of the paper, as you can tell there. Okay? Right, okay. Next one. What about varied line thickness? Now, I'm going to go for one of my other brushes. Look at that one. I'll work on that one later on. I'll show you that one. Now, I'm going to go for the Pan Art one. This is sort of a... It's not an expensive brush. I can't remember how much this one was now, but it's probably about £3 or £4. Probably less than that even. It's been a long time ago when I bought that. But it's only a cheapy sort of brand. But the quality feels okay with this one, you know. So, varied thicknesses. Here we go. I'm going to load this correctly. Playing with different brushes, as you will do as well, every now and then. Just trying out different ones. A couple of taps will probably do it. And if I go over here, I can create the fine lines as per usual, like so. Like that. But that's barely touching the paper, so 2 hairs in air, well not quite, but you know what I mean. If I press on a little bit harder, bearing in mind there's not much of a reservoir of paint on this brush, so you can't go too far with it. A little bit more pressure, then you get that thicker line, but in this case, because it's run out of paint already, that line is broken. If I compare that to, say, I don't know, should we go for the size 4 now? Yeah, I like playing with brushes. That one there. Load it. Give it a roll. Load it, roll it, tap it. Okay, got it. So once again, fine lines. Oh, no, fine enough. Oh, that's not too bad. That's not too bad. That's okay. Fine-ish. I've not taken quite enough paint off there. I'm going to put a little bit more pressure on that now. And you can see, because I've got a larger reservoir on the bristles of this brush, obviously quite a larger volume there, it's creating that really dark line. It's not breaking on that watercolour paper. See the advantage of working with a larger brush. Even though I always work with a small brush, I know. I press a little bit harder, a bit more pressure. And it goes to show, and it's starting to break up now. Look at that. I know. So a little bit more pressure and it's breaking up. But the beauty about this sort of brush, as I said earlier on, is that you don't have to keep reloading it. That's the benefit through working with a larger brush like this, and to be able to create different thicknesses of lines as you're going through this. I know. What I suggest you do once you've watched this video today, be it live or on catch up, it's entirely up to you, is have a play with the brushes that you've got. See what sort of kind of effects you can create with those brushes. I'm going to dig out another brush in a minute, just out of interest, and see what I can do with it. One I've never used before. I know. You'd think after 44 years of painting, something like that now, I would have used all the different brushes around and that's out there at the moment. But no, there's so many, isn't there? And also different types of brushes. So I'm going to have a play with one of those in a bit and see how that one goes on as well. What about painting whiskers? Now, I did mention that at the beginning when we worked on the fine lines. I would normally use my size 00 brush. And I'm going to go for that one first of all. So if I'm painting whiskers with something like this, first of all, you've got to think about the colour, of course. They're not always black, are they? Sometimes they're white. Then we know a song about that, don't we? So, and sometimes they're grey. And also a variety of colours. The more you look, the more you see that photograph. So if you've got a large photograph you're working on, and you want to paint a whisker, or a numerous kind of whiskers, quite a few whiskers on a cat, really look close in, zoom into that photograph, and decide if it's all one colour, or is it more than one colour? Does the colour vary from the muzzle all the way through to when it gets over across the background, you know, or across the back, or the rest of the face? So look at the different colours you can see within those whiskers. That's very important, it really is. So first of all, we know how to create this now by going that natural curve on your wrist. Load the brush, like that, show you again. Give it a couple of taps, get that natural curve. And then, what I'm going to do is just very lightly create the whisker. Why I get that natural curve, I call it ghosting. And by doing that, it gets you a sort of muscle memory going. So if I start from the top this time, now imagine that's where the face is there. You want to finish off with a tapered line. So as I pull away, that line gets slimmer. Show you again. Do it quicker. The line gets slimmer. See that? So it's really faded out down that end. So I'll show you one more time on that. So you're going to start off, think about that sort of curve, ghost it first of all, and then with this size 00 brush, to show how fine you can get your lines, you'll then taper, kind of flick out as you go away. That creates a nice gentle curve with a tapered point. If you start away from the head of the cat, then bring that line towards the cat. So say for example, you've got a cat's head, and then you want to put the whisker going over the top of the background. You don't want to start in the background because you'll start off with a dot or a sharp edge. So I mean, so it's quite sharp there compared to here. I'll show you on a larger scale because I know that it's slightly blurry today. So I'm going to go for my size 4. That's a big brush, it really is, I know. Well, for me anyway. Give it a tap or 2 or 4 or 5. And I'm going to ghost it again. And I'm going to make sure it's a little bit wider so you can see it, a little bit thicker. So I'm going to start off from the cat and then bring that line out and then away. See how that's tapered? There's a finer line there on the edge. That's what I mean by doing that. So when you're working on cat's whiskers, as I mentioned, look at the colours, look at the thickness of the lines, look at how those colours, mention the colours, look how the colours blend to one another, how the different colours within it, and also the angles of those lines as well. Think about rotating your paper every now and then. If you've got to rotate your pad, your painting, then do that as well, because that's really an advantage. It kind of helps you create that sort of gentle arc or gentle curve towards those lines. There you go. So a little bit about painting whiskers with a finer brush by basically working with fine lines, as I've been mentioning here, you know. So that's what you've got to consider. Let's have a quick look what else we got. Now, one thing I do on a regular basis, this is quite a short video today for obvious reasons. One thing I do on a regular basis, instead of using the point of the brush, I flatten the tip of that brush. Well, why do you do that, Paul? Well, I don't really know. Well, I do. What it is because I really want to make sure and create more of a chiseled edge. You can use a chiseled edge brush, of course you can, and we do have chiseled edge brushes. I've got one knocking about here somewhere, which is something like that. That's a large one. Yeah, I'm not going to use that one, am I? But give you some general idea on what you can buy. You can obviously buy smaller versions of that as well. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to load this brush. I'm going to load it up, okay? Give it a tap or two. And then I'm going to get my hands and really make a mess of my hands and flatten those bristles. Just flatten them like that. And you can do that as well within the mixing well. So instead of using your hands and getting them filthy, you can just flatten those bristles on the side of the mixing well. You can barely see it, I know. Then you'll end up with a chiseled edge, which will be a wider line. And if you turn the brush around so it's nice and narrow, you can then create a fine line by the side of it. So you can use fine lines and chiseled edges at the same time. Try and get that just right if I can. So I'll show you again, look. So I'm going to go with the fine line first of all, and then the chiseled edge like that. It's broken away, so there's not a lot of paint on the brush. If you have too much paint on the brush, it won't work. Obviously, the bigger the brush, the more you'll get of that wide line for the chiseled edge like so. So it's a good way if you want to do something like a calligraphic style. You can do it this way as well. Now, if you did that, you've got to pull rather than push when doing calligraphy, haven't you? You can't do calligraphy by pushing the brush. You've got to pull it, then push down harder, then pull to get a final line, then push, pull, and then I'm going to pull down and widen that line there. So you can create calligraphic styles, anything like that. If you want to sign your painting in a funny signature, you can do it that way as well. Now, the last thing I want to talk about today are cheap brushes. Now, I know there's a lot of brushes on the market, as I said earlier. And the thing with the brushes on the market is you get sport for choice, don't you? You never know what to buy. How many times have you looked online or in a local shop and thought, what do I buy? You know it's a watercolour brush, great, brilliant. But why would I buy the more expensive brushes rather than the cheap brushes? And what difference are there? Yes, you get different bristles. A lot of the bristles I buy now tend to be artificial, synthetic bristles like this one here. In fact, all of these brushes here are synthetic bristles, believe it or not. I have got and have bought in the past sable, which is nice to use, but I do find sable tends to be more, difficult to control, in my eyes anyway. I'm used to controlling a synthetic bristle brush. That's quite a mouthful actually, a synthetic bristle brush. So what we got? I'll show you on these here, look. We've got this one, which is a Rosemary & Co, and that's sort of a mid-range brush. And I do like these. I use these quite a lot, as I said earlier on. And that's the XP Series 366. Again, synthetic. They're all synthetic. You've got this one. What's the next one there? That's the Rosemary & Co one again, just different size. You've got this one here, which is Pan Art. Now, Pan Art is, I wouldn't say it's an expensive make. I wouldn't say it's a cheap make. Well, they are. They're not expensive as such, but they're not as cheap as you can get them. I would say they're more of a mid-range brush. It's one that not that many people tend to use that I know of anyway. If you do use Pan Art, let me know in the comments down below again if you don't mind. And which ones you tend to use. This one, by the way, just out of interest, this is one, I'm trying to think of the series on this one, 4401. It says on there, round 20. These are ones that Pan Art sent me to kind of test out for them. Got plenty of testing videos here on YouTube for them. If you're interested, have a look at the video. I'll try and put a link there after this has gone live eventually, okay? So what I'm going to do, this one reeks, well, as you can see, look how well that works. Look how fine that line is. And this is a, well, relatively inexpensive brush. And that works really well for sort of a, well, not cheap, but a little bit higher than cheap brushes, if you know what I mean. Inexpensive, let's not say cheap. It's not very nice, is it, saying cheap? It's cheap, that one. If you go for, let's go for my size 00, you've seen that one in action anyway, you know that one works. Load it, roll it, give it a tap or two. And that one works really, really well, doesn't it? That's why I'm so used to using this particular brush. And also the length of the bristles vary as well, bear that in mind. I think on the size 00s, looking at these, I'll show you this one in a minute. This one, the bristles are slightly shorter, only very slightly, Other than that, they're all very similar in height, or in length, should I say. And then you got the cheapest of all the brushes in question. Let's just say I was on that big shopping channel beginning with A. You know the one, don't you? Shopping website. Yeah, AM. A. Anyway, look at this lot. I bought all of these brushes. But how well do they work? These are really dirt cheap. These work out about, I can't remember what they were now, about 25 pence each. You know, which is pennies, literally pennies to buy. And I thought I'll try them because somebody told me about them once. And I thought, yeah, right, okay. I think I'd rather stick with my half decent quality ones like these here. So I thought I'll have a go with these and see how well these work. Now, I have done a small painting using these in the past, and it worked out okay actually. But how long will they last? That's the question. And these are also synthetic bristles. So I'm going to load it. I'm going to roll it. I'm going to tap it again like that. A couple of times will do. They're very lightweight, and you can see it's a bit of a bend. I don't know if you can make that out on camera. That sort of goes uphill there. I don't know if it's loose. No, it's not loose. That's how cheap they are. So if I try creating the line with, oh, you're kidding, with this one, look at this. Look at this. I am quite impressed with a cheap, I said the word again, a very inexpensive brush. Like that. And you can see how well a cheap brush tends to work. So, you know, when people buy the very expensive brushes, I think, what was it I was going on about the other day? I've got one here, just try kind of stretch across the camera a minute. This one is a mop brush, just out of answer. It's got nothing to do with fine lines. But just to show you the difference. This one is a professional mop brush by Pan Arts. And I think it was about £100 or so. It was really expensive, probably, I don't know what it was. But it's around this very, very expensive brush. I can't remember what the bristles were on that one now. But I've used that and I found hairs come off it. I think it might be sable, to be honest. Compared to this one here, which is by Rosemary & Co. I think it's a 1/2 inch mop brush. Or this one here by Paul Rubens, and there's Esprit 818 size 4, and that works really well as well. And these are really cheap as well. These two are really cheap. These are probably I don't know, £5 each or something like that. So I compared these ones just out of interest off camera to my very expensive brush, and the quality of these were just as good in my eyes. The painting was about the same sort of, you know, quality really. Didn't make much difference to me at all. So when we're talking about brushes and the quality of the brushes, I think it also depends on how you use that brush. It depends on the paper you're using it on. If you're using a rough surfaced watercolour paper, then you finally could wear the bristles out on the brushes really swiftly, especially the fine brushes. And you want to think about the tip of that brush as well. Look at the bend in that. That's terrible. So I used to look down a pool cue years ago and see if it had a bend in it. This one's certainly got a twist towards the bottom. But you know what? Look how well this little, well, inexpensive brush works. I'm going to fully load it now. And see how well that offloads that paint. There you go. Right, well there you are. Well, if you fancy having a look at some of the videos I've got here on YouTube, and also to do with watercolour, and that includes learning how to paint wildlife in watercolour. So what I'll do, I'll pop a link at the end of this video in the top right hand corner for you, okay, in a bit. So until then, I'll say goodbye for now. And, well, you know, keep them brushes wet. Bye.